In a high-rise office, a quiet black janitor stuns the CEO by speaking flawless Mandarin, Spanish, and French. But that's just the beginning. She knows. 8 languages raised her daughter on corns, in her own, and never stopped learning. This true story of overlooked talent becomes a janitor promotion story that redefines his success, respect, and what it means to be seen. Watch this powerful, real-life story to the end and tell us how it moved you. It was a Monday morning in downtown Atlanta, the kind that felt busier than usual, even if nothing truly urgent was happening. The sun hadn't fully pushed through the cloud cover, and the city was caught in that familiar gray hush between rush hour and routine. Inside, the towering glass of Parkstone Tower, one of the city's busiest corporate buildings, people streamed through the dast, revolving doors, coats rustling heels, clicking on polished tile, eyes locked to screens, earbuds tucked in coffee, clutched like currency. No one really made eye contact. That was just how mornings went in places like this. In the middle of it all, crouched beside the touchscreen directory, was a woman in a pale gray housekeeping jumpsuit. The sleeves and collar had faded over time, and her name tag, worn thin at the edges, had a scratch across the B in Baker. You had to squint to read it. Right. She moved with quiet efficiency, her gloved hand steady as she wiped the tanned, fingerprint-smudged glass, barely noticed by the dozens of people who walked past. The jumpsuit matched the Clivant, while so well it might have been intentional. She didn't blend in because she wanted to. She blended in because that was what the world around her expected. Her name was Helena Baker. She was in her early 42s, average height, solid build, and carried herself with the kind of silence that made people ignore her entirely. She had short, natural curls tucked under a navy blue cap and eyes that moved quickly, but never too directly, trained from years of knowing when attention could be dangerous. She'd worked here for over a decade. Most employees didn't know that. Most had never even asked her name. Some maybe didn't even know there were night cleaning staff, only that the trash cans emptied themselves and the coffee tables stayed clean. Helena was finishing up her routine in the lobby when she noticed an older man near the security desk. He was fidgeting with a printed email, looking back and forth between his phone and the touchscreen, clearly lost. His jacket was buttoned wrong. His face looked tired and a little confused. Helena paused, straightened up, and walked over. She asked in Mandarin if he needed help. Her tone was clear and gentle. The man immediately perked up, his relief unmistakable. He explained, also in Mandarin, that he was supposed to meet someone from the International Logistics Division, but couldn't find the right floor. Helena nodded, spoke again, this time slower, using more precise phrasing, and pointed toward the elevators. The man smiled, bowed his head lightly, and thanked her with sincerity that caught a few eyes nearby. None of it was loud or theatrical. It was the kind of moment that should have passed without ripple, but someone saw it. Dylan Graham, CEO of Parkstone Logistics, was on his way to the Blunatif executive floor after parking in the Fleur underground garage. He wasn't looking for anything unusual. He was checking emails, half paying attention to the world around him, but the sound of spoken Mandarin, fluent and confident, stopped him mid-step. It wasn't the language itself that stunned him. It was the source of it. Dylan scanned the lobby and found the speaker. It took a second to register what he was seeing. A cleaning staff member speaking Mandarin, like someone born to it. She was gesturing now, calm and authoritative. And then, just as seamlessly, she turned to a delivery driver entering from the facade side door and switched into Spanish. Her tone shifted not dramatically, but enough that it was unmistakably native. She was giving him directions to the freight elevator. The driver nodded, gave her a quick gracias, and moved along. Then, as if this were something she did every day, and it was Helena, turned to a vendor examining a mislabeled crate and said something in French. Her voice carried a kind of quiet clarity that made even a passing security guard look up. Dylan felt a tightness in his chest, not alarm, but something closer to guilt or maybe disbelief. He was a man who'd spent the last 20 years traveling across continents, attending language training, workshops, working with global clients. He'd hired translators, built cultural training programs, and yet here inside his own building on a Monday morning, like any other, the most multilingual person he'd encountered in months was someone who scrubbed the marble floors. Outside his boardroom, he walked toward her, not with authority, but with curiosity. His pace was slow, deliberate. He watched as Helena adjusted the strap on her cart, wiped her gloves on a towel, and reached for her checklist. He hesitated for a moment, then said, "Excuse me." Helena looked up surprised. Her eyes flicked toward his ID badge, then back to his face. "Yes, sir." That was Mandarin, right? Dylan asked. She nodded. "Yes, sir. You speak it fluently?" "Yes, sir." "And Spanish? French?" "Yes, sir," she said, steady as ever. There was a pause. How many languages do you speak, Ms.?" He squinted at the tag. "Baker 8, sir. Mandarin, Spanish, French, Portuguese, German, Arabic, Haitian, Creole, and I'm learning Vietnamese." Dylan blinked. Vietnamese. Helena allowed the faintest smile. "My daughter's best friend is Vietnamese. I thought I should at least be able to understand her grandmother." He couldn't help the small laugh that escaped him. It wasn't mockery. It was astonishment. He took a step back, looked at her again. Really looked. Not as a janitor, not as a background presence, but as someone with undeniable weight. "I'd like to talk to you in my office," he said. Helena didn't move right away. Her body was still, but her eyes changed. They narrowed slightly, not in defiance, but in calculation. She'd had years of people ignoring her. An unexpected invitation from the CEO. That wasn't normal, and she knew enough about the world to understand that sudden attention could be dangerous. "Now?" she asked. "Yes," Dylan said. "If you have a few minutes." She glanced at and her checklist, then at the elevator. "All right." As they walked together, Dylan pushed the elevator button, holding the door open for her. Helena stepped inside, standing near the fourth corner. The space filled with quiet. It wasn't awkward, but it wasn't casual either. Dylan noticed her hands, how she folded them neatly in front of her, fingers twitching slightly, like she was holding something back. "I've worked here for 13 years, Helena said as they rose. Dylan turned to her. "I've never been to the executive floor." He gave her a small nod, the kind you give when you realize something should have been papered, obvious, but wasn't. "You might be surprised how quickly things can change." Helena didn't answer, but her posture shifted. She straightened her spine, slightly, not out of pride, but readiness. She wasn't sure what was waiting for her upstairs, but she was used to not knowing. That had been her life for a long time, adapting to the unknown, surviving moments like this with calm and clarity. When the elevator dinged and the doors slid open, she stepped out first, her shoes barely made. A sound against the polished hardwood, the floor. The hallway smelled like citrus, and leather like money if you had to name it. A receptionist glanced up, surprised to see Helena walking beside the CEO. She opened her mouth to ask something, then seemed to think better of it when Dylan gave her a quiet nod. They reached a glass-walled office. Dylan opened the door and gestured inside. "Please," he said, "have a seat." Helena sat slowly, her hands folding in her lap, her eyes moving across the room. She didn't look intimidated, just alert. Dylan sat across from her, leaned forward slightly, and said, "Miss Baker, I'm going to be honest. I didn't expect to have this conversation today." Helena nodded, her expression unreadable. "But I just saw you speak 3 languages in less than a minute, like you were flipping light switches, and I need to understand. How does someone like you end up working here, cleaning floors?" Helena didn't speak right away. Her gaze drifted toward the window, then returned to him. "You got time for the truth?" she asked. Dylan didn't say anything for a long moment after Helena asked if he had time for the truth. He simply nodded, the kind of nod that meant he wasn't just being polite, he was actually listening. The office was quiet, except for the low hum of the HVAC system and the occasional tapping of a car horn down on Peachtree Street. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city moved like it always did, unaware that inside this glass box, something quietly important was about to unfold. Helena leaned back slightly in her chair, not in a way that suggested comfort, but in a way that helped her ground herself. Her palms rested flat on her knees, her fingers stretched out, then curled slightly as if she was preparing to speak something she hadn't said aloud in a very long time. "I was born in Mobile, Alabama," she said, her voice steady. "Only child. My mom was a nurse's aide. My dad worked on ships, metal pipes, long hours, never really took a day off unless his back gave out." She paused, not for effect, but to let the memories settle before continuing. "They didn't have much, but they made. Sure, I had books, good shoes for school, and a quiet space to study." Dylan watched her closely. She wasn't performing. She wasn't trying to impress him. This wasn't a story polished from sympathy. It was fact. Simple, unembellished, and clean. "I was good at school. Real good," she continued. "I got a scholarship to Georgia State. Studied linguistics. I picked up Spanish in high school. French came easy after that. Then I just kept going. Portuguese, German, Arabic. Language was the one thing I could control. One thing that didn't ask for much more than time and focus." She glanced toward the window for a second before returning her gaze to Dylan. "I made it through my undergrad with honors, started a master's program, thought I might work in translation, maybe teach, maybe even apply for one of those government jobs they always advertised on campus." Her lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "But life doesn't always run the plan you set out on." Her voice dropped slightly, as if to make space for the words that followed. "My mother had a stroke my second year in grad school. I came home to take care of her, thought it would be temporary. Then my father passed 6 months later. One day he was mowing the yard. The next day he was gone. Heart attack." Dylan shifted slightly in his chair, not to interrupt, but as if the weight of her words had landed and he was adjusting under it. Helena didn't notice. Or maybe she did, and kept going anyway. "I tried to keep up my classes remotely, but the bills came fast. Medical debt, funeral costs, everything piled up." She took a quiet breath through her nose. "Then I found out I was pregnant. That was its own story. The man didn't stick around, but I wasn't surprised. I stopped asking people to stay a long time ago. For the moment, the office was still again." Dylan didn't speak. He looked at her not like a CEO looks at an employee, but like a man trying to reconcile the running version of her he'd known, or rather ignored, with the version sitting in front of him now. Helena continued, her voice even, but her eyes just slightly shinier than before. "I needed work, anything that let me be home in the friend afternoons with my daughter maybe. She was everything, still is. I took whatever I could get. Grocery clerk, night shifts at nursing homes, cleaning gigs. One day, a supervisor here said they needed someone for the night custodial team. Hours were decent, no benefits, but it paid better than most. I said yes." Her tone didn't change, but the pause after those last 3 words carried weight. "I've been here ever since," she said. 13 years. Mostly nights, sometimes early mornings like today. Quiet work. People don't bother you. They also don't see you, but that's the trade-off." Dylan leaned forward, slightly, his elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "You stopped going to school," he said gently, not as an accusation, but as a recognition. Helena nodded. "I couldn't afford it. I had a baby to feed, light bills to pay. I didn't have time for credit hours or essays, but he didn't stop learning. I used the library. I borrowed textbooks. I listened to news broadcasts in other languages, downloaded free audio lessons. I bought old language CDs at garage sales." She shrugged. "I kept going. It was the only part of myself I'd held on to that still felt like mine." Dylan blinked, slowly processing. "So, those languages, Mandarin, Spanish, French, you learned all of that on your own?" Helena nodded. "Some in school, most after. I just kept building on them. I also speak Haitian Creole. My grandmother used to speak it when I was little. I wanted to relearn it after she passed." There was a long beat of silence that followed, not awkward but thick with realization. Dylan looked around. his office at the plaques, the conference trophies, the globe in the corner, the framed mission statements, and then back at Helena. Why didn't anyone know this? He asked quietly, more to himself than her. Helena's face didn't shift because no one asked. People see the uniform, and for some people they see my skin, and that's all. They need to make up their minds. That sentence hung in the air. It wasn't bitter, but it had weight. She wasn't asking for pity. She wasn't angry in a mallet way that lashed out. She was stating a fact, the kind people often dance around, but know deep down to be true. Dylan sat back slowly. Have you ever tried to apply for anything else? Helena nodded. Twice years ago. Once for a part-time assistant admin position when my schedule freed up. Once for a receptionist role in another department. I submitted my resume, got no response. When I followed up, the HR woman glanced at my badge, at my uniform, and said they were looking for someone more eased of an office culture. I stopped after that. Dylan clenched his jaw just slightly. That woman still work here? Helena didn't answer directly. I wouldn't know. I keep to myself. I come in, do my job, go home. That's how you survive in places like this. If you stand out too much, people start wondering what you're doing out of place. She looked at him, then steady and clear-eyed. I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad. Mr. Graham, I'm not trying to make a point, you asked, and I'm just telling you the truth. I didn't fall. I didn't fail. Life happened, and I did what I had to do. There was another long pause, but this time it was different. Dylan sat back fully in his chair, eyes locked on hers, and all the noise of the city outside, all the chatter in the halls, the emails waiting in his inbox, the vendor calls, the quarterly budget reports, none of it felt louder than this moment, because Helena wasn't a janitor anymore, at least not in his eyes. She was a living reminder of something he had forgotten somewhere along the way. That brilliance doesn't always come in a business suit. That talent doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it speaks quietly in a language from the other side of a mop bucket, and sometimes it's been standing right there the whole time, just waiting for someone to listen. Dylan didn't say much after Helena finished telling her story. He sat there quietly, eyes fixed on her fingers, loosely interlaced, as if running calculations in his head, but not the kind you find on spreadsheets. It wasn't just about being impressed anymore. It wasn't even about surprise. It was the kind of pause a person takes when something inside them has shifted and they're trying to make sense of what to do next. After a moment, he leaned back slowly and nodded once with a kind of finality that didn't need words. I may need to follow up later, he said. If something comes up, would that be all? Right? Helena gave him a slight nod, calm and unreadable. Yes, sir, she replied. Thank you for your time, Dylan, added, his voice softer now. You're welcome. She stood up, gave a polite dip of the head, and exited the office without another word. Her steps were measured, her face composed. She didn't look around. She didn't try to read the room. Helena had long since learned not to linger where she wasn't sure she belonged. Back in her work zone an hour later, Helena resumed her shift. She checked off the service rooms, restocked supplies, wiped elevator buttons, and organized the microfiber cloths the way she always did. Her body moved with instinct and rhythm, but her mind wasn't entirely present. The conversation replayed in fragments, not the whole of it, but certain words, light switches. 13 years. You stopped being seen. She didn't know if it meant anything. People in her life had listened before, nodded politely, and gone right back to pretending she was part of the wallpaper. Dylan Graham was a CEO. She didn't expect him to be any different, but he was. At 3:45 that afternoon, Dylan stepped into the service level for the first time in years. The hallway was narrower, the paint less fresh, and the air warmer than upstairs. He moved past cleaning carts and water jugs and paused outside the janitorial supply room where Helena stood sorting folded towels by type and color. She turned slightly when she sensed movement at the door and blinked in surprise. You came down here, she asked. I couldn't stop thinking about our talk. Dylan said, stepping in a little. Listen, I have a favor to ask. Helena raised an eyebrow, skeptical but calm. What kind of favor? There's a meeting upstairs. A group from our Sao Paulo office flew in early. We were supposed to have a translator lined up for them, but she called out sick. Last minute, everyone's scrambling, and no one else speaks Portuguese well, enough to run the conversation smoothly. He paused, then added, "Can you help?" Helena hesitated. It wasn't fear on her face, more like the instinctive hesitation of someone who's been asked to fix things they never got credit for. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "Are you sure?" "I'm very sure," Dylan said. "We just need someone to make sure the conversation doesn't fall apart. I know you can do that." She exhaled through her nose. "All right," she said. "Let me wash my hands." 7 minutes later, Helena stood outside conference room 4C. Her pale gray jumpsuit freshly straightened her posture upright but modest. The contrast between her and the polished suits inside was stark. No one was expecting her. 4 Brazilian executives sat in leather chairs, murmuring in Portuguese, scrolling on phones. A junior associate stood at the whiteboard, clearly uncomfortable. Dylan stood to the side, arms crossed, trying to manage the tension. When Helena walked in, the room stilled slightly. She gave a polite nod, walked to the center, and began speaking in Portuguese, clear, fluid, and confident. The shift was immediate. The executives turned toward her, their body language relaxing within seconds. Helena welcomed them, acknowledged the travel delay, explained the meeting flow, and began translating the opening statement from the junior associate. Her tone was professional but warm, her delivery smooth and without hesitation. The meeting moved forward seamlessly. Helena transitioned between English and Portuguese without skipping a beat. She didn't just translate words, she conveyed intent. When one of the Brazilian reps made a culturally specific joke, she laughed lightly and responded with a similar quip in return. The entire room chuckled. Even Dylan, who didn't speak the language, caught the rhythm. It was obvious something had clicked. For the next 20 minutes, Helena facilitated a conversation that would have otherwise unraveled. She clarified financial phrasing, rewarded a logistics concern so it made sense across both cultures, and smoothed over a misstep involving a misprinted product spec. She spoke slowly when needed, matched tone when discussing more sensitive topics, and gave each speaker a moment to feel heard. She didn't take notes. She didn't need them. Her presence was enough to command the flow. When the meeting ended, the Brazilian team shook hands, all around, smiling, visibly pleased. One of them turned to Dylan and said in clear English, "She's better than anyone we've worked with this year." Dylan nodded, his eyes already drifting toward Helena, who was quietly collecting the empty coffee cups and used handouts into a tray. "Where'd you find her?" the man asked. Dylan answered without thinking, "Right here, in the hallway." Afterward, he caught up to Helena as she placed the last cup back on the rolling cart. "You ever do professional translation before?" he asked. Helena shook her head. "Not officially. I've helped folks in hospitals, DMV offices, social services, that sort of thing. No certificate, no time," she said. "My daughter needed me more." Dylan paused. "Where is she now?" "She's 26, Helena said, smiling a little. "Just became a registered nurse. Lives in Tempe. Paid for school herself. Stubborn like her." "Mama." They both laughed, and for a moment, it didn't feel like CEO and janitor, just two people talking about life in the hallway of a corporate building that for the first time felt oppressed, little more human. As Helena turned to roll her cart back to the service level, Dylan touched her elbow gently. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't just help with the language, you helped the entire room breathe." She looked at him and replied, simply, "It's what I do." He watched her go, the cartwheels squeaking softly against the tiles, and felt something inside settle. Not the kind of satisfaction that comes from fixing a faces problem, but the kind that comes from seeing something someone you should have seen all along. That night, Helena clocked out just past midnight, changed back into her jacket, and walked to the bus stop alone. Her body a G like it always did, and her eyes were heavy, but her thoughts were still in that conference room, not for the recognition, not for the compliments, but because for 20 minutes she had been exactly who she was meant to be. Not hidden, not diminished, not just the cleaning lady. And that, she knew, didn't happen often. She didn't allow herself to believe anything would change, but something already had. Not just for her, for everyone who'd been in that room, and especially for the man who was finally learning how to really see. By Tuesday morning, whispers had made their way from the executive floor all the way to the break rooms and opened cubicles. On the 7th, it wasn't on any official memo, but people knew something unusual had happened. The cleaning lady? Yes, the one in the gray jumpsuit who pushed the supply cart every evening and never raised her voice, had sat in on a very high-level meeting with executives from Brazil, not as a helper, not to refill water pitchers, but as a translator, fluent, poised, and by the sound of it, better than the contractor they had actually hired. No one said her name out loud, mostly because no one knew it, but everyone was talking about her. Some of the younger interns were in awe. One of them even said he wanted to switch to linguistics after overhearing what she could do. Others weren't so generous. In my the staff kitchen, 2 marketing assistants sat hunched over their salads, speaking low but sharp. I've been here 2 years, one of them muttered, stabbing at a piece of grilled chicken. I have a master's in international business, and I'm still stuck writing briefs for people who barely read them. She was scrubbing urinals last week, the other replied, shaking her head. Now, she's what? Some kind of corporate savior. The tone in the office had shifted. Helena felt it before she saw it. People who used to nod politely in the hallways now looked past her, or worse, through her. Conversation stopped when she entered a room. Laughter dropped a notch, like someone had dimmed the volume. She told herself not to read into it, but she had learned long ago that when people change their behavior around you, they rarely do it for reasons you want to hear. In the cleaning supply room, she spoke to Warren as she refilled the sanitizer bottles. He noticed her pause between tasks and the tension in her shoulders. "You okay?" he asked. Helena offered a quiet shrug. "Feels different this week, like I'm being watched." Warren leaned against the door frame. "You are." Word got out. "Folks are unsettled." Unsettled? By what? Me talking. He didn't answer right away. He just gave a half nod, the kind that said, "Yeah, probably." Upstairs, Dylan had noticed the change, too. He walked into a strategy meeting and felt a new tension humming under the surface. During a conversation about upcoming diversity initiatives, someone he didn't catch who made a quiet comment, "Guess all you need now is a mop and a podcast." It wasn't said with humor. It landed cold, flat, and full of something that made Dylan's jaw clench. Later that day, he pulled up Helena's employee file. It was thin, just her application, a few HR notes about shift swaps, no disciplinary marks, nothing special, but they're tucked near the retain. The bottom were 2 scanned resumes she had submitted years ago, once for a front desk assistant role and another for a part-time admin position. Both had been marked not qualified. He read them carefully this time. Academic awards, volunteer interpreter work, a brief internship with a regional hospital, translating intake forms. He wondered who had read these before him and how they had missed it, or if they had missed it at all. Downstairs, Helena kept working. She didn't slow down, didn't take longer breaks, didn't try to blend in or stand out, but in the quiet spaces, like the supply closet or the far end of the loading dock, her thoughts drifted to her daughter Mavie, who had texted her and the night before, "Mom, I'm proud of you. Don't let them make you feel small." To the meeting room, where for 20 minutes she had felt like her mind had a purpose again, and to the faces that looked surprised to see her walk in, and even more surprised to see her succeed. Then, late Wednesday afternoon, she was summoned again. Warren found her by the elevator and handed her a folded slip of paper. From upstairs, he said, "Mr. Graham wants to see you." Elena stared at the paper, then at him. "Did I do something wrong?" He didn't say. The elevator ride was quiet. She kept her eyes on the digital numbers above the door. When she stepped out, she noticed people noticing her. Eyes followed her down the corridor. One receptionist even gave her a polite, knowing smile, like she knew something Helena didn't. When She entered Dylan's office. He was standing by the window with a mug of coffee in one hand and a file in the other. "Come in," he said, not turning. Right away, Helena closed the door gently behind her. She stood quietly until he turned to face her. "I've been thinking." He began setting the mug down. About talent, about waste, about how many people we pass by every day without really seeing them. She didn't reply. She didn't trust easy praise. She had heard too many nice words that meant nothing the moment she left the room. "I want to create a position," Dylan continued. "Something this company should have had years ago. A cultural liaison for international affairs. Someone who can bridge communication gaps, support our global staff, assist with cross-border projects." Helena stared at him, her arms crossing slowly. "Why me?" "Because you've already been doing it," he said, "and because I'm tired of walking past people like you. People who do twice the work for half the credit." She didn't speak. Not at first. Then she asked quietly, "This real or just a good look for a press release?" "It's real. I'm building the job around you, not fitting you into something old." She looked down at her hands, then back up. "I don't have a degree. You have something better. Real. World fluency, lived experience, and more heart than half the people on my management team." Helena took a deep breath. She didn't smile, but something in her face relaxed. The smallest shift, like a door cracking open. "What about my shift downstairs? Who replaces me?" Dylan smiled. "We'll find someone, but we can't replace you." That was the moment. Everything began to change. Not just for Helena, but for everyone who thought they knew what value looked like. The next morning, Helena arrived at her new office on the 12th floor just before 8. The nameplate beside the door read, "Helena Baker, Cultural Liaison, International Affairs," printed in clean, black letters on brushed metal. The hallway was quieter than most other floors. No running printers, no heavy foot traffic, just the low hum of ventilation and the occasional distant phone ring. She unlocked the door with her new badge, pushed it open, and stepped inside. The space wasn't large, but it was hers. A tidy desk near the window, a computer she hadn't touched yet, a tall green plant in the corner, and a small table with 2 chairs. She walked around slowly, setting her bag down and pulling the blinds open, just enough to let in the morning light. In a moment, she stood still, looking at the plaque again. It felt like standing in someone else's shoes, not because she hadn't earned it, but because no one had ever offered them before. As the Plydenax building filled with staff, Helena began to sense the atmosphere shift again. Not like the whispers from earlier that week. This was different, more calculated, more polite, but more distant. People glanced her way in, passing, but didn't stop to chat. A few offered stiff smiles. No one sat next about the grew her in the break room. A man she recognized from the copy room once made a point to hold the elevator door for 2 others, letting it close before she reached it. It was an open hostility, but it wasn't nothing. At 11:30, her phone rang with an internal call. She answered. "Miss Baker, this is Lutia Martin. I'm head of international operations. I'd like to go over a few documents with you. I'm right outside." A second later, a knock. Helena opened the door and saw a woman in her early 50s. Tall, sharp, featured, and dressed in a deep navy suit. She held a clipboard and wore the expression of someone who had already decided what to think before hearing a word. "Good morning," Helena offered. Lucia walked in without replying. She glanced around, eyes lingering on the modest office. "So," she said flatly, "you're the new liaison." Helena nodded. "That's what I've been told." Lucia didn't sit. She handed Helena a folder. Vendor disputes from Sao Paulo, 2 unsigned contracts from the Dubai partners, and some flagged reports from Milan. "Think you can manage that?" Helena took the folder, thumbing through the pages briefly. "I'll need a few hours to review, but yes." Lucia tilted her head slightly, studying her. "You have experience in corporate environments, only from the outside, looking in." Lucia didn't smile. She placed the clipboard on the edge of the desk and adjusted her sleeve. "Let me be clear. This role is more than translating coffee orders and greetings. It's about nuance, contracts, context. You get one thing wrong and we're liable. Helena met her gaze calmly. I don't understand. Lutia nodded once, turned and walked out. Helena sat down, opened the folder, and started reading. Downstairs, Dylan was finishing a leadership meeting when the subject of Helena came up again. One of the board advisors, Anthony Jenkins, raised a brow and crossed his arms. Let's be realistic, Dylan, he said. This is not sustainable. You can't pull talent out of janitor closets and expect them to understand international operations. Dylan didn't flinch. She's already solved a vendor conflict and mediated a Madarar translation issue that cost us thousands last quarter. For now, Jenkins replied, but what happens when something goes wrong? You want to explain to shareholders that you gambled on someone without a degree, without certification, because it felt right. Dylan leaned forward slightly. I didn't gamble. I listened and I watched. She didn't ask for this role. I offered it because she's already doing the work. All I did was give it a name. Jenkins didn't respond, but the silence around the table was enough to feel the friction settle in. Later that afternoon, Dylan stopped by Helena's office. She was still at her desk, a pen between her fingers, several documents open and marked with color-coded sticky notes. She looked up when he knocked gently. Busy? He asked productively. She replied. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I wanted to check in. First full day. How's it going? Helena leaned back slightly. Some people look at me like I stole something. You didn't. That doesn't change how it feels. Dylan sat in the guest chair. You could have said no. You could have just given me a bonus and walked away. Why take this all the way? He thought for a moment. Because I saw myself in you. I didn't mop floors, but I worked 3 jobs through college. My dad fixed cars for 30 years, and no one ever asked him what else he could do. People assumed things about me, too. Took me years to stop trying to prove I belonged and just start doing what I was meant to do. Helena listened, her hand still, her eyes softened just a little. So now, you're the one deciding who gets in? She said. Exactly. A beat passed. Then, Helena said quietly, there are going to be people who hate this, who hate me. Let them. They'll either get over it or get out of your way. She nodded once. The pen clicked closed. Her back straightened. All right then, she said. Let's get to work. By the second full week in her new role, Helena's presence on the 12th floor no longer drew gasps or whispers, but it hadn't yet settled into full acceptance either. The polite distance was still there, a kind of formal quietness whenever she stepped into a room. But beneath that, something subtle had started to shift. People were watching her, yes, but not only to question her anymore. Some were observing with a cautious kind of curiosity, even respect. It wasn't loud. It didn't come in applause. It came in smaller signs, like when a junior analyst from procurement quietly asked her for help wording an email to a client in Paris, or when the assistant from HR started lingering near her desk, just long enough to ask about her approach to vendor communications. On Tuesday morning, Helena was reviewing a translated invoice from Milan when a knock came on her open door. A young man, maybe early 22s, wearing a crisp but slightly oversized dress shirt and carrying a laptop awkwardly under one arm, stood there with a nervous smile. Hi, he said. I'm in the intern program. They told us we could talk to anyone, and I guess I was wondering, could I ask how you got here? Not here in the office, but here. Helena looked up and closed the folder in front of her. Of course, she said. Come in, sit down. Min sat. Slowly, like he wasn't sure the chair would hold him. He cleared his throat. People say you speak 8 languages. That true? Helena smiled faintly. Yes, not all perfectly, but enough to help people feel understood. He nodded. That's kind of amazing. I grew up bilingual, Vietnamese and English, but I still mess up talking to my grandma. Sometimes. Helena laughed lightly. That makes 2 of us. I'm still learning. Vietnamese, just the basics. She glanced at her notepad and with a warm but tentative tone said, Shinch Cow, came on. That's about where I am. Min grinned. That's really good. Helena nodded. I figured if I work with people, I should try to meet them halfway. They talked for a few more minutes. Men asked her how she managed to keep learning all these years. Helena told him the truth. 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there. Podcasts while folding laundry. Flashcards she made out of scrap paper. She told him it wasn't about being smart, it was about being stubborn. Later that day, Min was back in the break room with another intern. She talked to me like I mattered, he said. Didn't treat me like a kid or like I was wasting her time. Just answered. Word began to spread quietly, softly, but surely. Helena wasn't just in the building. She was starting to matter too. People who had never had someone look them in the eye and treat them as equals. She became the person interns dropped by to ask questions before big presentations. The one they ran their practice pitches by. Not because she was in charge, because she listened. On Thursday, she sat in on a Zoom call with a new partner from Morocco. She introduced herself in Moroccan Arabic, slowly and clearly. The call was brief, but by the end, the head of the partner team placed a hand to his chest and said, in broken English, no one ever speak to that friend. At us in our language, not from company. Not like this. Helena simply replied, you matter. That's all. That evening, Dylan stopped by her office. She was rearranging folders, her eyes tired but focused. He leaned against the door frame. You're making waves, he said. She looked up. That a good thing? Around here, it means you're doing something right. She gave him a tired smile. Trying to. He stepped inside, glanced at her notes. Been thinking about something. A program, maybe. Internal development training for folks in non-esque roles. I can't stop wondering how many more Helenas are in this building. Helena paused, set the file down. There are more. They just haven't been seen yet. Dylan nodded slowly. I want to help me build it? She didn't answer right away, but she looked at him, then at her desk, then back, and finally said, already started in my head. The next morning, Helena found a handwritten note taped to her door. 3 words, no signature, just we see you. She folded, tame it carefully and tucked it into her notebook. Then she opened her laptop, rolled her shoulders, and got back to work. Helena received the calendar. Invite late Wednesday evening. It came from an executive assistant she had never spoken to, titled simply Oversight. Committee briefing. Attendance required. There was no agenda, no context, just a time, a room number, and a list of names. She read it twice, then once, more, and let her hand rest on the desk. She didn't need to guess what it was. Dylan confirmed it the next morning. He found her in the break room, his coffee untouched. They want to review your MADIT position, he said, his voice quiet, but even. Standard language is that it's a procedural check-in. But let's not pretend. This is a challenge. Helena nodded once slowly. All right, Dylan leaned forward. You don't need to prove anything you haven't already proven. Helena didn't respond right away. Then, she said, I've spent most of my life proving things to people who weren't asking questions in good faith. This doesn't scare me. At 9 a.m. sharp, she stepped off the elevator onto the 17th floor, where the glass turned darker and the air was cooler, quieter. A woman in black slacks and a headset led her into a private boardroom paneled in closer cherrywood. The table was long and the chairs tall. At the far end sat 8 members of the Oversight Committee. She recognized 2 faces from the corporate website. The rest were strangers. Anthony Jenkins sat at the center. His posture was upright, his hands folded over a leather folio, and his expression unreadable. No one stood to greet her. No one smiled. Miss Baker Jenkins began, gesturing to the seat across from him. Please. Helena took the seat, placed her hands flat on the table, and waited. I appreciate you making the time, he said. We'll keep this brief. As you know, the recent appointment of your position has drawn attention. There's been no prior precedent for a cultural liaison role at this company, let alone filled by someone with your background. Helena gave a single nod. Understood. A woman, 2 seats down, adjusted her glasses. You were promoted from a non-exempt custodial position. Is that accurate? Yes, ma'am. Another member, older, leaned in slightly. No undergraduate degree completed. No formal training in international policy. No certifications in business, linguistics, or compliance. That's also correct. Jenkins interlaced his fingers. Then help us understand, Miss Baker, what qualifies you to serve as a liaison in matters that involve multi-million-dollar partnerships with international stakeholders? Helena took a breath. Not rushed, not hesitant, controlled. I've spent years communicating across languages, across cultures, often in high-stress environments where miscommunication had real consequences. Hospitals, government, offices, legal clinics. I did that, unpaid on my own time. Here at Play Atenter, Parkstone, I've already mediated vendor disputes, resolved a 3-month delay with a partner in Morocco, and translated 3 contracts previously misfiled due to translation errors. I didn't study theory. I delivered results. The woman with the glasses asked, "Do you believe lived experience is an acceptable substitute for formal education?" Helena met her eyes. "I believe it's not a substitute, but it's a form of knowledge this company has undervalued for a long time." Jenkins leaned back. "Do you see how this might set a problematic precedent? Other employees might assume promotions are now awarded based on access, personal story rather than merit." Elena didn't flinch. "Then they misunderstand what merit really means. It's not always about resumes. It's about who can do the work." One of the younger board members, a man in a gray tie, spoke for the first time. "And you believe you can continue delivering the same results under increased pressure?" "I've been under pressure my whole life. This building just started noticing." There was a pause. Then Jenkins leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Miss Baker, I'm going to ask you a question directly, and I'd like a direct answer. Would you be sitting in that chair right now if you weren't a woman of color?" The question landed with full weight. The room went silent. Even the assistant in the corner shifted in her seat. Dylan, seated as a silent observer behind. Helena looked up sharply, but didn't speak. Helena turned toward Jenkins. Her face didn't harden, but her eyes focused with clarity. Maybe not. Maybe no one would have bothered to look twice. But that's not the question that matters. The question is, now that I'm here, do I belong? Jenkins said nothing. He looked down at his notes. A long pause followed. Helena continued. This role didn't exist before because no one thought someone like me belonged in it. I'm not asking for credit. I'm asking you to look at the outcomes, not the uniform I used to wear, not the degree I didn't get. Look at the work. Ask the people I've helped. Ask the partners who stopped canceling calls because they finally felt understood. She kept her hands flat on the table. Her voice never raised, but there was weight in every syllable. The youngest board member nodded slightly. The woman in the glasses closed her folder slowly. Jenkins gave a final glance down the table. We'll be reviewing the scope of your role. For now, no changes will be made. Thank you for your time. Elena stood. She nodded once, then walked out of the room without looking back. Dylan caught up with her in the hallway. You all right? He asked. They asked the wrong question, she said. He nodded. You gave the right answer. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Helena felt her heart settle back into rhythm. It hadn't been a fight. It had been a present reckoning, one long overdue. Helena returned to her desk the day after the oversight committee meeting with a quiet resolve. There was no fanfare, no announcement, no shift in tone from the leadership floor. But the atmosphere had changed subtly but meaningfully. The silence she had grown used to walking through felt different now. It no longer carried judgment. It carried observation. Some people looked away, still unsure, but others met her eyes. Some even nodded. And when she stepped into meeting rooms now, no one paused to ask what she was doing there. Her name was already printed on the agenda. That week, she worked through a backlog of partnership documentation involving teams in Italy, Turkey, and Morocco. She rewrote segments for clarity, flagged a misaligned phrase that had caused a stall in negotiations, and caught a translation issue that had skewed delivery terms in a French language contract. On Thursday, during a call with a North African partner, she greeted them in Moroccan Arabic. The lead delegate placed his hand on his precious chest in gratitude and said, "This has never happened before." Helena smiled and responded, You deserve it. It wasn't said for applause. It was simply true. On Friday morning, when she arrived at the 12th floor, something caught her eye. The door to the main corporate training room used for new higher orientation and development in workshops had a new sign. It was subtle, brushed metal with etched black lettering. It read the Baker Room. She stopped for a long moment, hand resting against the frame. No one stood nearby to explain. There was no ribbon, no photo op, just a door and a name. Her name. Later that afternoon, Dylan stopped by her office. He leaned against the door frame as he often did, coffee in hand. Smile. Small but steady. It was time, he said simply. Helena glanced toward the training room and then back at him. That a permanent thing? Permanent enough, he said. People will ask and someone will answer. That's how culture changes. Helena nodded. Culture doesn't change in press releases. Exactly. That evening, as she was packing up, she found a folded piece of Revlor. Paper slid under her office door. No envelope, no sender. Inside, handwritten, in careful block letters. It read, I used to think I'd be invisible forever, but today I stood a little taller because of you. Thank you. Helena held the note for a long moment. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She folded it neatly, placed it in her notebook, and sat for a while in silence. The next week, Dylan returned with a thick folder. I want to launch a pilot program, he said, placing it on her desk. Voice inside training, language, access, internal mentoring, not just for janitorial staff, for maintenance, security, cafeteria workers, anyone. We've been stepping over instead of walking beside. Helena opened the folder slowly. The program outline was there. Sections marked in yellow, handwritten notes in the margins, and a space left blank under Program Advisor. You want me to help lead this? She asked. Dylan nodded. No one else should. She closed the folder, not dismissively, but carefully. Her fingers tapped it twice, then rested. We don't need to. Find the next me, she said. We need to make sure they don't get buried in the first place. Dylan smiled. Exactly what I hoped you'd say. By Thursday. Internal. Buzz had already started. Word had spread that Helena Baker wasn't just holding a new title. She was shaping how the company would look for years to come. A junior HR rep asked her if she'd be willing to record a short video about her journey for new hire orientation. Helena declined. Let them see the work, not the story. And yet, her story kept moving. At the next all-hands meeting, when the VP of Operations mentioned the Voice Inside initiative, a few heads turned toward the back row where Helena sat. No one clapped, but one person nodded, then another, then several more. Not everyone knew what was happening, but enough people understood something had shifted, and it wasn't going back. That night, Helena walked past the baker and paused again. Through the glass, she saw a group of interns setting up chairs for a workshop. One of them looked out and waved. Helena waved back. Then she turned and kept walking. She had work to do. Helena hadn't planned on speaking at DINE, the Cincinnati Logistics Leadership Summit. In fact, when the invitation first landed in her inbox forwarded from Dylan with a short note that read, I think they meant to ask me, but I told them to ask you. She considered deleting it. Public speaking wasn't her arena. And standing in front of hundreds of executives, analysts, and logistics professionals from around the country sounded more like a punishment than an honor. But Dylan had added one more, the sentence they need to hear from someone real, and that Helena couldn't argue with. So 2 weeks later, she found herself standing backstage at the downtown convention center holding a glass of water in one hand and the speech she had written and rewritten in the other. She wasn't wearing a power suit. She didn't have a stylist or a coach. She wore a soft beige blazer, clean black slacks, and shoes she had polished herself the night before. When the announcer introduced her as a voice that changed one company's culture from the inside, Helena took a breath, stepped forward, and walked to the floss podium. She didn't open with a quote and a joke. She didn't recite numbers or graphs. She started with her name, her real one, Helena Marie Baker. Then she told the room that she used to mop floors in a building just like this one. She told them she speaks 8 languages, but that didn't matter much until someone decided to listen. She talked about the years she spent invisible, the nights she cried in supply closets during lunch breaks, the promotions she watched go to people who never learned her name. She didn't cry. She didn't pause for effect. She just told the truth. About 10 minutes in the room changed. People sat straighter. Phones stopped glowing. Pens stopped moving. They weren't watching a keynote anymore. They were listening to someone who had lived the parts of the industry they didn't like to talk about. Helena ended simply, "I wasn't just a janitor," she said. "I was fluent. I was capable. I was ready." But nobody ever looked long enough to see it. So the next time you pass someone without a title, ask yourself, what are you really missing? There was no explosion of applause. It started slowly, then grew, and by the time Helena stepped away from the microphone, the entire auditorium was on its feet. She walked off stage, heart pounding, not from nerves, but from the release of holding it all in for so long. Backstage, a young man in his 20 seconds approached her. His eyes were red, rimmed. His hands shook slightly as he pulled something from his pocket. A photo of his mother in a cleaning uniform. "She speaks 5 languages, he said. "I used to be embarrassed to tell people that, but now I feel proud because of you." Helena placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "Don't ever be ashamed of where you come from," she said. "The only thing to be ashamed of is staying blind to brilliance." The moment didn't go viral. It wasn't posted online or turned into a press release, but it spread. Word of her talk reached inboxes, Slack channels, and industry newsletters. Her name showed up on a few nomination lists for professional development initiatives. But more importantly, she started getting emails, quiet ones, from people she'd never met. Some were custodial staff in other companies. Some were managers who had overlooked someone and now realized it. Some were parents who wanted their kids to see someone like Helena at the front of the room. Back at Parkstone, the atmosphere continued to shift. A new, higher orientation now included a section called Language and Listening, designed by Helena and Min, who had taken on a great formatting, a full-time role in the cultural liaison team. Maintenance staff began attending leadership roundtables. HR opened a referral channel for internal mobility with one rule: no resumes, just stories. And at the heart of it was the idea Helena had sparked. Not that anyone could rise, but that many already had, and no one had noticed. The Monday after the summit, Helena returned to her office and found a new note slid under her door. This one was typed, "No name, no sender, just one line. You reminded me that who I am is enough." She sat down, placed the note next to the others, and stared at it for a moment. Then she opened her calendar and blocked out 2 hours for something she hadn't done in years: free space. No meetings, no emails, just time to think. Because the next part of her work wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about building something no one could ignore. That evening, as she packed up her bag to leave, her phone buzzed with a text from a number that made her pause. It was her daughter, Me. "Turn around." Helena blinked, confused, then looked up, and there she was, Mavie, standing in the hallway outside her office door, holding a small bouquet of yellow daisies and wearing that same stubborn smile she had since she was now 4. "You didn't think I'd miss your big week, did you?" Mavie said. Helena walked toward her, not fast, just sure. She took the flowers, then pulled her daughter in close. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Mavie whispered. "You showed the world what I've always known." Helena didn't say anything for a moment. Then she nodded. "Let's go home." The new program launched on a rainy Monday morning with little ceremony. No balloons, no ribbon, no grand speeches, just a circle of chairs in a reconfigured conference room on the 6th floor and a laminated sign on the cabin door that read "Inside Pilot Cohort." Helena arrived 10 minutes early, carrying a tray of bottled water, a notepad, and a folder thick with applications that didn't come with resumes, but with handwritten letters. The people sitting in those chairs weren't managers or polished professionals. They were cafeteria workers, janitorial crew, members, overnight security guards, warehouse staff. One woman from the laundry department still had her name badge clipped to her apron. No one spoke. At first, they shifted in their seats, unsure of the space or their place to it. Helena greeted each one personally, asked their name, and sat down with them, not in front, not above, but with. When everyone had arrived, she began not with a slide deck or an introduction, but a sentence that landed gently. I started with one word, and I never stopped. Then she invited them to share a word, any word in any language that meant something to them. A man named Ray, who had worked nights in building maintenance for 12 years, said perseverance. A woman named Ela, originally from Syria, offered bait, the Arabic word for home. Helena wrote each word on the whiteboard, and as they spoke, she noticed how the room began to shift, not in structure, but in posture. People sat straighter, eyes lifted. The great silence was no longer from fear, but attention. For the next 90 minutes, they discussed more than communication. They shared frustrations, ambition, stories they'd buried for years because no one ever asked. Helena guided listen, clarified where needed, but never took over. She didn't come to inspire. She came to equip. When the session ended, no one rushed out. They lingered. Rai asked if there would be another meeting. Isla offered to bring tea next time. Helena smiled and said yes to both. By the end of the first month, Voice Inside had received over 50 new entries from departments most people at headquarters didn't even know existed. Dylan sent a note to Helena with a subject line that read, "It's working." She replied, simply, "It always was. We just weren't looking." Word spread beyond the building. Other companies began to untop and inquire. A logistics firm in Oregon asked for the program outline. A school and district in New Jersey requested a virtual talk. Helena declined most public interviews, but she agreed to one podcast recorded in a quiet office with soft lighting. The host asked her what success looked like. She answered, "When someone walks into a room and doesn't have to prove they matter before they get to speak." Back at Parkstone, changes became structural. Internal job. Boards added a field skills outside. Current role. A new policy allowed cross-training without supervisory approval. For the first time, cafeteria. Staff were included in professional development workshops. One morning, Helena walked past the training center, still titled the Baker Room, and saw a manager sitting across from a janitor, both of them listening to a presentation in Spanish. She didn't interrupt, she just kept walking. On a Thursday afternoon, as the sun filtered through the blinds in her office, Helena opened a small wooden box she kept in her bottom drawer. Inside were 4 things: her old gray janitor badge, folded notes from anonymous coworkers, the dried yellow daisies maybe had given her after the summit, and a piece of paper she added that day, handwritten in blue ink. Keep going. That evening, maybe. Stopped by with takeout. They sat on the office floor eating noodles from cardboard containers, talking about nothing and everything. Maybe had just finished a double shift at the hospital. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, her eyes tired but bright. "You've built something, Mom," she said between bites. "Something real. Something that's going to outlast both of us." Helena looked at her daughter, the young woman she'd got, raised through night shifts and exhaustion through eviction notices and library cards. "I just opened a door," she said. "Yeah," maybe replied, "but you held it open. That's the difference." As they cleaned up, Helena glanced at the window. The city lights blinked quietly. No billboards bore her name. No documentaries had been made. But somewhere in another building, someone was speaking up for the first time. Someone was being heard. And that, to Helena, was everything. The next day, a small plaque was added to the lobby wall at Parkstone. No spotlight? No. "Hey, announcement. Just a quiet addition next to the mission statement." It read, "Greatness doesn't always come in a brand suit. Sometimes it shows up in silence, does the work, and changes everything." In honor of Helena Baker, who reminded us all to stop walking past the extraordinary. And beneath that, in smaller letters, "Talent has no dress code. Brilliance doesn't need permission." Helena saw it on her way in. She didn't stop to read the whole thing. She already knew what it said. She just smiled, walked through the doors, and got back to work. Thank you for staying with Helena's story all the way to the end. In a world where overlooked talent often goes unseen, this powerful true story reminds us that dignity, brilliance, and quiet strength can rise from the most unexpected places. If this emotional transformation story moved to you, if it made you reflect, remember, or simply feel, don't keep it in. Share your thoughts in the comments. Let your voice be part of this conversation. This isn't just a janitor promotion story. It's a real-life story of recognition, resilience, and rewriting the rules. We're just getting started. Stay tuned for the next chapter series of heartwarming, inspirational stories from the everyday lives that deserve to be seen. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.